culture is your internal and external brand and identity as an organization. And it's marketing's role to help create that messaging and be the storyteller and the communicator of what that means and who we are, and keeping that messaging in front of not only the external world, but really in front of your employees and team members.
A great organizational culture won't appear simply because you want it to. If you want to make your cultural vision a reality, it must be clearly articulated and creatively reinforced. I'm your host, Tim Spiker, and this is the Be Worth Following podcast, a production of the People Forward Network. On this show, we talk with exceptional leaders, thinkers, and researchers about what actually drives effective leadership across the globe and over time. You just heard from Jen Bauer, Senior Vice President of Marketing and Culture at Miron Construction. Jen has been with the company for almost 20 years, but her path to becoming the chief champion of Miron's culture did not begin in human resources. It began somewhere else, and after you hear her story, it ends up making all the sense in the world. While core values exist in organizations to inform decisions and drive behaviors, Jen knows well that no one will be guided by a North Star that they can't recall. And that reality guides Jen in how she and her team present, communicate, and reinforce the organization's culture and values. In our conversation, Jen talks about Miron's use of the ENPS, the Employee Net Promoter Score, and how it helps her gauge employee engagement and satisfaction. We also discuss how, in very practical ways, she's fostering the company's desired culture through coaching and regular check-ins. As with many of us, Jen had leaders who believed in her even before she believed in herself. And that is where we begin our conversation.
I feel like I've really been blessed to have a lot of great leaders in my life, all the way from teachers when I was young who encouraged me and pushed me and challenged me, made me believe in myself before I did. I was so blessed to have a great internship mentor while I was in college. My background is that I went to school for English and communications, but always knew I never wanted to be a teacher. I have a great deal of respect for teachers, but I knew that that wasn't the path for me. But while I was in school, I struggled a little bit with what am I going to do afterwards? And I guess I thought if I could write well and communicate well, I would find my calling eventually. And I had a great roommate in college who was a business major. So thankfully, she had plenty of internship opportunities. There weren't a lot of them for English majors that weren't looking to teach. So I was able to take some of her cast-offs and luckily landed in a spot that honestly, I feel like changed the trajectory of my career. I ended up interning at architecture and engineering firm that was real close to my school and had a great mentor there. I ended up in their marketing department. And really, that's where I developed my love for marketing. And he was such a great teacher and so patient and gave me so many opportunities really to test my skills. That's where I developed my passion for the AEC industry. So having that start, the architecture portion of the business, and then eventually landing in construction, it just was the natural path. And I was lucky that when the job came about at Miron Construction, it so closely resembled what I did during my internship, which I loved. And that's been the path, and I've been there ever since.
What was the name of the person that you worked for with your internship?
His name was Scott Moore. It's interesting because I've kept in touch with him for the last 23 years. I actually work with him in a capacity. So he's the marketing person for Performa, which is now EUA. They've merged. And I still work with him to this day. We work on different photography projects for different projects that we're capturing. I think it's probably been fun for him to watch me grow. It's been fun for me to watch him grow. And just to keep that relationship going through the years has been really cool.
You said something in there that I hear a lot when we talk about the background stories of leaders who we get a chance to visit with here on the podcast, and that is somebody believed in me before I believed in myself. Talk about that a little bit, because it's just such a powerful idea. For your experience, talk a little bit about how that unfolded for you.
Honestly, I was a really shy and introverted kid who enjoyed reading, enjoyed writing, definitely more individual type things. And I had a teacher that to this day, a high school teacher, her name was Miss Hosker, and she gave me so many different opportunities, and I just looked up to her so greatly. I just looked at her background, and she was so smart and so well-spoken. And the fact that she took that interest and gave me some of her time and energy was such an incredible thing. I think that's the biggest thing. We don't always realize the impact we have on other people's lives. And sometimes it is just giving that time investment and opportunities. And throughout college and even into the beginning of my career, I really did struggle because to this day, public speaking is not something that I love to do. But I've had a few individuals who really pushed me and said, if you want to grow in leadership, unfortunately, that's just a part of it. And you're going to have to push yourself to do it. And they just stayed on me. And I appreciate that they didn't let me run away from it. And they encouraged me and gave me feedback and gave me suggestions for getting better, and just honestly continue to throw my name out there for different things where I was like, no, I don't want to do that. I think some of that is a big part of leadership, is stepping into that fear of, I don't know how this is going to go. I don't know that I'm going to be successful, but I'm going to give it a try and I'm just going to continue to get better. And I have found with a lot of things, it really is the more you do it, the better you get at it, the more comfortable you get at it. So having those opportunities and being pushed and challenged has been a good thing. At the time, it doesn't feel that way. You just want to say, just be kind, take care of me, and don't force me to do something that scares the crap out of me. But that's not where you grow.
Yeah. You're taking care of your future self in that moment as opposed to the current one. One of the things I think can happen when we get into the business space as we graduate from one opportunity to the next and end up in the C-suite as you have, is remembering the power of that simple invitation to somebody. We look at ourselves as leaders and sometimes we forget that we do have pretty exceptional influence, and how just even the smallest invitation or encouragement, not because we're all that in a bag of chips, but because of the positions that we hold, it lands with others in a significant fashion often. So not to think much of ourselves, but to also be wise and say, hey, if I take 10 seconds and make an invitation to somebody into a space where they might be a little bit uncomfortable, but it's good for them, it could have a reverberating impact in a lot of different ways over the course of years.
It's incredible. I think back even to my early years at Miron and different opportunities, whether it was the right place at the right time or being willing to raise my hand, the impact that those experiences have had. We were working on, in conjunction with some other companies and some school districts, on an educational opportunity focused on educating guidance counselors in high schools about the opportunities that are available outside of the four-year degree. We all know that's not the right fit or the right path for everyone. And there are so many incredible opportunities out there that is not the linear way to get there. So we were trying to figure out a way, how do we educate guidance counselors really to sell opportunities in the trades to students, because that is a better path for some kids. And I think I was probably at Miron for maybe a handful of years, still in my mid-20s, and our ownership needed someone to be a part of this committee. And I got in the room, and I was in the room with the CEO of Miller Electric and the superintendent of Menasha School District, the president of ASCO. And I just remember looking around the room going, I don't think I'm what they were looking for when this opportunity came about. It was, again, another space where it's like, I'm scared to speak up and I don't have the experience that these individuals do. And they were so kind and welcoming and encouraged me to participate. And I still remember that there was one thing that I really appreciated about those meetings is when we got done with them, there was always action items that came out of it. And everybody was expected to take something and do something before our next meeting. And watching the CEO jot down notes of what he was going to do between meetings, he took items on as well. And I just had such great respect for that. There wasn't a feeling of, we're at this level, you're at this level, you take the grunt work and do it. Like, we're all a part of this and we want this to be a successful event. So we're going to do what we need to do to make it happen. So that was being in the right place at the right time. And Mike Weller is another one who was a big influence on me. And I feel like anytime I'd see him at events over the years, he'd always check in and see where I was at with my career, and has been a wonderful sounding board and just a teacher of leadership that has been wonderful to have. And if I wouldn't have had that opportunity, I would have never had the chance to meet the CEO of Miller Electric.
I'm so glad you had that experience. Unfortunately, not all senior leaders are like that. There are some that get onto those associations and committees and they sit on higher level leaders from other companies, but not as high as me. So you can just go do all the things and I will preside. I've seen that before. and it's not fun. I'm so glad that you had a different experience, somebody who was operating as a peer alongside you. And now the leaders who sit high in those positions, we're not usually telling, here are all the great things we learned from them in those moments. We may tell some other stories, but not that one. It's usually a little less positive. So great that you had that experience. So let's dig into your time at Miron here a little bit. Among other things, you're responsible for developing and protecting the culture at Miron, but you have a unique path to have ended up in that position. So let's talk a little bit about how that evolved for you and how you end up sitting in that culture champion seat within the organization.
So I began my career at Miron as a marketing coordinator, and really a lot of what my focus was, I was supporting our business development team with materials and marketing collateral as they went out to pursue work. So putting together presentations, proposals, and all of those types of things. At the time when I started at Miron, it was a much smaller organization. So my role was much more of a jack of all trades. So at that time, we didn't have a graphic designer or a PR person or an events planner. We did it all. Looking back, I'm so grateful for that because I look at the team I manage now, and certainly not to the extent they do, but I feel like I've had the opportunity to do what each of them does today in some form or fashion. So to have an understanding of the challenges that they run into and the frustrations they may have, it's just given me a better perspective. And I know not everybody has that opportunity, especially within the same organization for their entire career. Luckily, I was given opportunities and able to prove myself and show the value I could bring to the organization, and organically grew through the organization. So moving up to director of marketing, then eventually vice president of marketing communications, and then into the culture seat as well. And again, really, it was organic growth. I feel like there's such incredible synergy between marketing and culture. To me, culture is your internal and external brand and identity as an organization, and it's marketing's role to help create that messaging and be the storyteller and the communicator of what that means and who we are, and keeping that messaging in front of not only the external world, but really in front of your employees and team members. And really packaging up who we are, what we value, why we do what we do, what we're passionate about. One of my coworkers, she had been on my team and she moved up through the organization as well. She went to our ownership and said, I really think it's critical that we have someone who serves as a champion of culture in our organization. And that was a role she was very interested in taking on. Her name was Tanya Dittman. And the things that she did in our organization, the way she challenged people, and just her perspective on life, and the idea that taking care of people and the whole person is what's going to make an organization grow and flourish. And so she did that for a few years before taking on another opportunity. I had started talking to our owners. They had come to me after her departure. And I think we knew that for our employees really to get behind someone in this type of capacity, it couldn't be an outsider. We couldn't hire someone to be our champion of culture that came in from a different organization and didn't know the quirks and ins and outs of who we are, and to have that experience. And I think a lot of it was the longevity I had with Miron and knowing our backstory and who we are and what's important and what makes us special and different. I think that really was why they looked to me to consider that role. And then we had COVID hit and we kept going, but our focus changed for quite a while in the sense of how are we going to keep our project sites running? How do we protect everybody and make sure that we stay together as an organization? So then once we got through that initial piece, the summer of 2020, we started talking again. And at that time, the company was looking into do an organizational restructure. We had grown so much and so fast that I don't think the infrastructure was there to support that growth anymore. It had served us well, but it was time to start thinking about what is the future going to look like and who are the leaders of our organization going to be, and which not only positions do we need in the right spot, but which people do we need in those seats. And so at that time, we continued the conversation of culture and potentially the role I could have in that. And I certainly didn't want to give up my role in marketing because it's definitely my first love and my first passion. But like I said, I think there's such a connection between marketing and culture and how those tie together, and really not only helping to create the culture, but then to communicate that culture and keep it top of mind and a focus of the organization has just been something that I've really loved, because one of my favorite things about work are the people that I work with. My team is why I get out of bed every morning, and I just love being in a room with them, coming up with ideas and how are we going to grow and what's the next thing and how can we be creative about it and really bring that story to life. That is just the best part of my job. And to me, getting to play a role in culture was just extending that team. So it was no longer just having an impact in marketing, but how can I have an impact on our entire organization?
This is the second time that we have had as a guest on the podcast somebody who moved into a shepherding culture from the marketing space. And so I just wonder, for those that are listening, as you're looking at your organizations, as you think about how are we intentionally investing in the development of culture, and if you see an opportunity there, it just makes me wonder if some of the best choices for moving forward might be coming through your marketing department because of how things need to be communicated well. Because you mentioned the word packaging. What if packaging shows up to help us lean into something that's good for us? What if packaging shows up to help us lean into something that's going to be good for the entire organization? And I think that's where it's a really interesting combination to think, hey, we're going to show up into the culture space with a background in marketing so that communication is sticky. Because if it's not sticky, if we don't remember it, we're not going to do it. So it becomes really important. Later on, I want to talk a little bit more about what you've done with packaging around your culture, because it's not super complicated, but I think it's really effective.
I was just going to say, I think it's interesting that you can on that packaging part, because I would say that was probably my one hesitation with considering the role, because I think there is a perception sometimes that marketing and communications and PR, it's all about putting things in a nice little box and putting a bow on it and making it sound and look good. And I think that was one of my fears with taking it on. I didn't want people to think that we were looking at this from an inauthentic perspective, and that it was just like, what can we package up so that the outside world thinks we have this amazing culture and it looks good and we put that spin on it. And that was one of my fears, because I didn't want that to be how our internal audience viewed culture, that this is something for out there, because it really wasn't. It was just, how do we take all that is good and great about us and put that together and be able to share that message more so internally than externally. But honestly, I'd rather share it internally and have our employees be our brand advocates, and they're the ones going out there saying, this is a great place to work and we want you to join our team and make us even better, versus what we're sharing to the outside world.
So how were you able to lean into authenticity as you're spinning up into this cultural role? How did that evolve for you as you got started in the role?
Honestly, I think a lot of it was asking questions and truly listening to people. We've gotten the habit now of regularly putting out an employee net promoter score survey to our team members, especially when you grow fast. In the beginning, everybody has a chance to wear a lot of different hats and be a part of all of those conversations. But as you grow, people have to specialize, and it's just no longer viable to have everybody a part of every conversation and every decision. I guess I wanted to make sure that we kept those lines of communication open and that it was a two-way street, and it wasn't just like, this is who we are. We're telling you who we are. Now go out and preach that message. We wanted our employees to tell us who we are. And I think in the past, we had company drivers at the time, and the way they were developed, they really were developed as a sales tool. We were trying to figure out who we are and how do we package that and sell that to our customers so that they want to work with us and that they understand that what they're doing aligns with what we're doing. And those drivers had served us well, but they no longer felt authentic. There was pieces of them that did, but other pieces we had kind of outgrown and moved into other spaces. So we knew it was time to rethink, like, what are our values as an organization? We are very intentional about hiring an outside company to help us through that process. So using that company, we ended up having 13 listening sessions with 120 of our employees, really to pull out. And again, no company is perfect. We all have things we can work on. We all have strengths and weaknesses. And it really was, how do we focus on those strengths and rally people around the things that make us who we are? But those listening sessions were fantastic. I think everyone who participated in it really enjoyed it, because There is the opportunity that you could end up having some negative conversations during those about what we aren't and what we wish we were and things like that. But this outside company, and their name's HumanWorks, they did a phenomenal job of really extracting those stories from our employees about what is the ideal Miron team member? What does that look like? And what are their characteristics? And once they were able to pull that out and help us put into words what our values were, I think everybody walked out of those listening sessions just on such a high because you were reminded of what is so great about our organization. People sharing stories across departments, and we had every age group in those rooms and gender and different tenures, every part of our organization from the office to the field, C-suite to entry level. And it was just such a great coming together. And I think everybody really enjoyed being able to hear these great stories that don't always get shared across those lines. And not every organization has this. And we're figuring out how we can articulate what that is and put it into words and then shout it from the rooftops.
I want to go back to something that you said a moment ago. Just give us a couple of sentences on what employee NPS is.
So Employee Net Promoter Score, it's really a simple way to gauge employee engagement and employee satisfaction. So it's a one-question survey. It's just on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to recommend working to Miron to a friend? And there, people who score on the high end are considered your promoters. You have your passives who are in the middle, and then your detractors at the bottom end of the scale. And really, when I say bottom, anyone who rates from a 0 to a 6 on that scale is considered a detractor. So someone who's likely unhappy and disengaged in your organization at that time. The last time we did the survey, we had our best engagement ever. We had 76% of the employees who received the survey filled it out, which I just thought was phenomenal. And it's a snapshot in time, really, of how things are going. So you never know when you're going to catch people. They could have had a great day. They could have had a bad day. They could have had an interaction with a team member that wasn't so positive. But there's also the opportunity to leave comments. And to me, you get much more from those comments than the rating because you get consensus over like what's bothering people at this point in time and what are some of the issues and themes that we need to look at if we want to get better.
I think probably a lot of folks got an initial introduction to Net Promoter Score through the consumer interface. It allows us to compare across industries. And when you talk about the word engagement, Gallup has done over 300 studies globally that show an undeniable connection in every way between engagement and performance, and every kind of performance you can imagine, from safety to profitability to lower absenteeism, all of that. So the fact that engagement ultimately is something that's reflective in an ENPS score with your employees is really pointing indicative towards where that productivity, that performance is going to be. And I love the idea of taking what was previously an external measure with our customers or consumers and flipping it around and pointing inwardly to the organization and saying, how are we doing? Is this a place where you're really excited to be engaged? So I love the application of that. Now, in the space of culture, I think in some organizations, probably those that are a little less successful in this space, there's kind of an acknowledgement that culture matters. And Jen and the team over in culture, they can take care of all of that stuff, which ultimately is not an integrated, authentic, deeply held culture. So as you look to protect and improve the culture over time, what do you do to avoid that slide towards the culture team's role as opposed to, hey, we all have a role in doing this? How do you manage that?
Honestly, I think some of it is around how you talk about culture. We do have an internal culture team that is made up of individuals who are part of our HR department, our marketing department, communications, learning and development, wellness, our leadership and life coaching area. So to me, it's the job of those individuals to continue to have conversations around culture. So we're keeping it top of mind and that we're regularly assessing where do we feel we're at? What are we hearing from our employees? How can we be better? What issues do we need to address? So they're the ones holding that flag and running forward with it. But we realize that we can't control the culture of Miron. It's our employees that are doing that. And it's those day-to-day interactions between team members, both internally and externally. That's what builds our culture. So we can create those spaces and try to create an environment where that is a discussion topic and people have the same language to talk about it. We completely realize that that is not our job to develop or say what the culture of Miron is. We can have goals for where we want to go, but if our team members aren't on board with it, we're not going to get there. So I think more the culture team's role is really to just keep that conversation going and to be reaching out to our employees really to find out what pain points they're experiencing, what obstacles they're hitting, and how they feel we can be better.
You mentioned life coaching and leadership. And so to me, that's a little bit of an open door for us to talk a little bit about the culture that you have there. Talk a little bit about life coaching and leadership. Like, wait a second, what's going on in this construction company? What does that have to do with our culture?
Sure. So every year we do an annual summit where we bring our team members together, and we've done it in different shapes and forms over the years, where for a long time it was our office employees had a summit, and then our field and our yard operations employees had a summit. We've brought them together. This next year, we're going to pull things apart again and do something a little different with our field and yard employees. But when we do those events, you have a huge cross section of your organization that's taken off-site. And part of it's about sharing information. Part of it's about team building and camaraderie and celebration and really showing appreciation for our employees. But we also are always trying to find what are those inspirational pieces or things that can really span the entire organization. And Tanya had read a book called The Dream Manager. She brought it to our owners. I don't know how she did it, but she got them to all take it and read it. And I think they were all moved by it. And one of our owners, he had taken it on a vacation with him and he read it on the plane and he came back and he's like, we need a dream manager. And I think we were blown away because I think her thought was it'd be really neat to have this guy come in and speak to our organization and talk about how people's personal dreams influence their work life and their work influences their home life and how that all is a holistic piece. So we brought in the author, I believe his name was Matthew Kelly, and he spoke to our group about this. And at the end of the presentation, I think it was Dave that got up there and said, and just so you know, we're going to hire someone in this position, especially at a construction company where we're typically traditional, conservative. And so we hired someone who ended up getting that program off the ground. She ended up taking another opportunity out of state. And then we hired our dream coach. His name is Eric Marco. And he has transitioned into more of a leadership and life coach because we really wanted people to know that they could go to him for more than just a personal dream. If there's aspirations at work or other things that they want to work through. But he's been a great resource for our team members. And he's like a therapist and he knows how to just pull information out of you. And he doesn't give you the answers, but he talks about it as like he knows how to hold a mirror up to you. So he's just been a wonderful resource for our employees. And we've had employees who have started side businesses, who have decided to find their birth parents, who were struggling with really meaningful things and wanting to save for a vacation that has been a lifelong dream. And how do I go about that? He's helped them partner up with resources that can help make that happen. But you talk about wanting to have benefits and programs at your organization that are really sticky and make people want to keep coming back. If you can say, wow, my organization helped me find my birth parents and now I have a relationship with them, that is really powerful.
All right, let's talk about standout. Standout means something. You're like, well, okay, I think I know what those two words mean, but what does it mean at Miron?
So Standout is a platform that we implemented a few years ago, and really with the intention of knowing that we were growing. And as you do grow and teams get larger, it's harder and harder to have those individual check-ins and those touch bases. And I think we all know from our own personal experiences how impactful those individual conversations and feeling like someone's invested in your growth and who you want to become, how critical that is. And yet when things get busy and projects need to get done, it falls to the back burner. So Standout was a great tool for us because team members not only find out what their personal strengths are and then work on continuing to better in those areas and to better understand themselves and really what drives them, what they're passionate about, what gets them out of bed every morning. But then to have a weekly check-in with their leaders and you can kind of put in what you're working on, maybe some obstacles you've encountered, things you're frustrated with. And then the leaders have a chance to respond back to that. And I feel like I'm pretty intuitive and in tune with what's going on with my team. But it took seeing those weekly check-ins and something that continued to show up week after week, because every week you're supposed to put in a love and a loathe. So something that really gave you energy and then maybe something that drained you of energy. And they saw something continue to show up in that loathe category that was so draining to one of my team members. I hadn't seen that on a weekly basis. And then they've been able to address it. Our team members use it in all different capacities. Some people are very religious about doing the online check-ins. Other people are just in closer proximity to some of their team members, so they have those daily or weekly check-ins in person. And then quarterly, you have the opportunity to do a pulse survey, similar to the ENPS, where it's a snapshot in time, but really gauging how people are feeling about how well they're feeling supported by their teams, how they view the mission of the company and the future of the company. Do they trust their team leader? And really asking those important questions to assess whether or not someone's engaged and happy at work. Because again, we all know that engaged and happy employees are more productive employees, and it's just better for the health of the team. We've been using that tool now for a couple of years. And like I said, everybody uses it in a little different capacity, but it's really brought to the surface some issues that no one wants to think about. But if they were left to fester, would that employee have just walked away because they didn't feel supported or heard? Even if they're a quiet person who doesn't necessarily want to ruffle any feathers, but it's still important that if you're not happy, that someone around you knows that and it can be addressed.
One of the things that's interesting as we think about the development and maturation of culture is how are we creating systems that support that development? And there are many organizations who have wonderful aspirations regarding culture that have been well thought out and well articulated, but they don't take that next step to create systems for continuous engagement and feedback around how they're doing and what's going on. So I just think it's so wise, whether it's Standout or some other system, to have a process for regular check-in. And I also love how it can be used in different ways by different leaders, depending on their perspectives. And also, as you point out here, not everybody wants to get in a room and talk for an hour about their perspective on things. That could be really challenging for some people. So the system has a number of entry points that work for people in a way that works for them. So I think it's really great that you're making the investment, and really important, because if we have great aspirations, but we don't have the systems that support it, then it's really not going to be something that happens at a significant level. So I love the organization is making that investment. So as we begin to wrap up here, I want to turn our attention to some of the cultural norms and values themselves in a unique way. What I would love to hear a little bit more from you, Jen, about is how you are packaging these things to communicate them. And I'm just going to encourage people to go to the Miron website. And because what you're going to see when you get there is you're going to see iconography that goes with each of these principles. And that might sound like a small thing, but getting back to intentionality, personally, I see something there that's very unique. So the cultural values here are stay grounded, think big, rally together, dig deep, and build legacies. And there's a wonderful little icon that goes with each one of those. So talk a little bit, if you could, about how the idea of we're not just going to use these words, but we're going to create visuals. We're going to have something unique that speaks to these things, and that's what we're going to use to help communicate them.
I think to me, that's where having a marketing background has been really beneficial. So one of my team members, Trevor, a graphic designer, he designed all of those icons. And the cool thing was our graphic designer and our creative services manager, we hired them the summer of 2021. So we were in the process of developing the values. So they had a front row seat from the beginning. And it was great to have an outside perspective of they didn't really know the history of Miron and maybe didn't have some of the baggage that came along with it, so they could look at it from a fresh perspective. But Trevor, he really dug into creating a look and a feel for them, because like you said, words are powerful. And again, coming from an English major, I'm all about words. Information is transmitted to people in different ways. So words might resonate with some individuals where icons will resonate with others. And we really wanted our values to be a visual part of our brand, because we knew that we were going to want to put these on everything. And again, you don't always have room for the words or the explanation, but if we could have something that quickly resonated with our employees and our team members about what we stand for and what we value. We put those on everything. They're on our corporate letterhead. They're on our business cards. They're on our website, our intranet. They go in our proposals. They're on our presentations. They're in digital signage around our office. So having those visuals, we rolled out the values. We actually did it during our annual summit. And we had our graphics team design these amazing banners that we hung from the ceiling in a conference center. So we used it as a chance to really celebrate. We finally can articulate who we are and what's important to us. I think the fact that our employees had some ownership and they already had the buy-in because they were part of the development. I know I feel a great deal of pride in those images and in those words, and I hope all of our employees do. And honestly, to this day, we still have a team that meets, I would say at least monthly, that we created a values touch point roadmap when we were going to be unveiling these because we didn't want this to just be like, here are our values and now we go on with your life. So how are we going to keep these in, how are we going to talk about these in newsletters, in our daily tips, in email? So we're constantly talking about them. What's the next step? Because we don't ever want them to just become wallpaper. So how can we reinvigorate them in new ways? And one of the things we did was shortly after we unveiled them, we created a new employee peer-to-peer recognition program all around our values. So when people want to recognize their team members, we have these small cards around the office that have a little lapel pin and a hard hat sticker. In our industry, hard hat stickers are everything. You see our construction workers who have worked because they symbolize projects and events they've been part of and initiatives and training they've gone through. There's a card for each of our 5 values and just a small space where you can just write a quick note. People can upload the recognition online and then other people can read it on our intranet. They can see it on our digital signage. And again, it's just that whole idea of talking on a regular basis about how are my teammates living out these values. I just love hearing what our team members are doing for each other, they're doing for the community, that they're doing for our clients. It gives you such pride to work for an organization where you're like, these things are happening every day by so many people.
What's so great about all of that is you're talking about being really smart and creative around communication that is serving something that is authentically part of the organization. It's marketing in the sense of we're articulating something that is there in a really winsome, attractive, and memorable way. And so when you take the skill sets around marketing creativity and apply it to a culture that is authentic, it's just a magical combination. And it also should be a little bit of a warning, because if anybody's listening, they're thinking, we'll make some icons. You better make sure that you're authentically pursuing those things, because making icons and putting them on everything isn't going to make it real. It might help reinforce where you want to go, but you've got to be applying back to the systems and the commitment to the whole story. Otherwise, it'll just be another thing that came from corporate that nobody listens to and doesn't care about. So there's a little bit of a warning in there as well.
And I love that you keep touching on the word authentic. The summit where we actually unveiled our values every year, we have a theme for our summit. And that year, the theme was Authentically Miron, because we were really celebrating what makes us who we are. Other companies can do similar things, but they're not going to have our history. They're not going to have that secret sauce. And really, I think that's what those values are. That's what makes us who we are.
What a pleasure it was to get the opportunity to visit with Jen about Miron and about her role as she helps to lead cultural development. There are a few things about our conversation that I want to point out before we wrap up, and one of them is personal to Jen. Now, here's a senior leader, and I suppose this story speaks a little bit more specifically to the folks that are a little bit earlier in their career who might be listening to our podcast. But just notice how she talked about her progression as a leader. She wasn't always as experienced and knowledgeable as she is now. And I realize that sounds like a silly thing to even say, but I think sometimes we look at people in very senior levels, if we're younger now in our careers, and we think that they've always had it all figured out. They've always been in the positions that they are, even though we know that's not true. And we forget that it's a progression over time. We forget that people have invested in them. People have made a contribution. People have opened doors for them. People have helped them learn things. And I think as Jen was so humble and open to share about her progression over time and the doors that people opened for her and all the things that she got to learn along the way, for me, it's just a reminder that even the leaders that we most admire, they weren't always as well developed as they are today. They have a story, they have a progression. And so maybe that allows you, if you're a little earlier in your career, to give yourself a little grace, to understand that there is a pathway that often takes time. We possibly at times need to be a little bit patient about that, but certainly have some grace for yourself, because every leader that you admire at one point didn't know what they know today and wasn't in the position that they are today. Another thing I want to reiterate is the ENPS, the Employee Net Promoter Score. I think this is a wonderful tool. If your organization is not familiar with it, I encourage you to get familiar with it. It's a great equalizer in many ways, and as you heard, it's just a single question, and it's a really telling one. Would you encourage a friend to work in this organization? None of us would recommend to the friends that we actually care about, here, come take a job in this organization or with this leader so that you can be miserable. We recommend jobs and organizations to people because we think it's a great place to work or a great leader to follow. So ENPS, if it's not something that you're utilizing, I definitely encourage you to look into it. And then finally, I want to talk about authenticity as it relates to culture. What you heard as Jen shared the story of Miron, the articulation of their values, what you heard time and time again is that it is authentically real. It comes from the core of who the organization is. And so as she brings her marketing background to help articulate and promote the culture, she's promoting something real. She's promoting something true. But it requires that authenticity in the first place, so that all that creative communication doesn't discredit the organization, frankly, internally. And that's why, as Jen and her team, as they bring the creativity to these various systems and to this various articulation with the icons and all the things they do with their culture, that's why those things are really meaningful and fun, is because what lives underneath of them is real. And that leads me to the question I want to leave you with today, and that is this. What is authentically true of your culture that you could be more creative to promote and more intentional to support with the systems within the organization? I'm Tim Spiker, reminding you to be worth following and to follow us wherever you receive your podcasts. If you've heard something valuable today, please share our podcast with your friends and colleagues. And if you're up for it, leave us a 5-star review. Thanks for listening.